Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show. Glad to have you with us today. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker. I'm the Executive Director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and this is my lovely wife, Susanne Stalnecker. She is, among other things, my wife, a mother to our children, and the Women's Director here at the Mighty Oaks Foundation. And we're going to talk about our women's program a little bit today, and more broadly, not just our women's program, but hopefully offer some helps to women generally who maybe they have served in the military, maybe they're married to someone who served in the military, maybe they're just a woman, and some of the insights that we can share today will be a help. But I wanted to talk about some of these things, and I'm excited that we can do that. Susanne and I, over the last couple of months, have been recording another show for Mighty Oaks called The Imperfect Show, little plug, commercial for The Imperfect Show. You can find that on the Mighty Oaks YouTube page. And that's been fun. That's just been us talking about some things that are going on in our lives or more broadly in other people's lives, and trying to share our experience of being imperfect people with the rest of the world. So we have a good time talking about these things and thought it would be fun to get on today. If you are watching on YouTube and you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please do that. Take some time to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And then as important, hit the notification bell. That lets you know when other content, additional content comes online. And in addition to the Mighty Oaks Show, we have tons of content being put onto our YouTube channel all of the time. Again, I mentioned the Imperfect Show, other shows that we do, other content that we produce, many testimonials of people who have been to our program and have really found hope and help and healing and direction, and those things can be an encouragement to you as well. And then just some videos that are just informational, just some things that you can receive. I'd love for you to get all of that, so take some time to subscribe if you haven't, hit the notification bell. Feel free as well to share this content, to like, to leave comments, and we would love to get that from you. And look forward to continuing to share this with you. For our partners at Mojo 50, again, thank you for listening. Always a privilege to be able to emphasize the great relationship that we have with Mojo 50. What a wonderful organization, wonderful network, and we're glad to be there. When you stop listening to this, again, jump over to YouTube and you can subscribe and you can find our other content there, and we would love to share that with you, and look forward to these conversations every time that we have them. So, you ready? I like to tell Susanne I'm just here to make her look good, but we all know that it's the other way around. But you are again, among other things, you're the director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation's Women's Legacy Program. Mm-hmm. As we get started, and again, I want us to talk specifically about some things that can just be a help to women, but we need to kind of frame that first and start with the platform of our program, and what it is and what we do, and then beyond that, some maybe advice that we would give. I use that "we" very generally. Advice that you would give to ladies who are struggling perhaps in some areas. So why don't you start by talking about the Women's Legacy Program, what it is, who we serve, the process of that, what it looks like, what someone could expect if they attended, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Our Women's Legacy Program for the Mighty Oaks Foundation is a faith-based program, and really the premise of it is presenting the biblical blueprint of the woman that God created us to be. Right. We serve a very broad spectrum of women, which makes us pretty unique. We have ladies that come to us that are first responders, veterans, active duty military, and spouses of any of those. Right. And so it really is an interesting environment, and it's a very, I think it does make us unique, like I said. We, I believe, are maybe the only program for women that kind of encompasses all of those roles, or those,
And we would say, in all of our programs, our men's program as well, that we serve the same demographic, veterans, active duty service members, first responders, or the spouses of those. But just the numbers being what they are, on the men's program, we'll have maybe a spouse of a first responder or a veteran every few programs.
Right. Yeah.
But on the women's side, just because of the numbers, it really breaks down to probably about 50%. Is that right? Yeah. Spouses, and then the other half would be veterans, perhaps active duty service members, and then maybe a spouse who's also one of those other things?
Yeah, I would say when we first started, it was mostly spouses and a couple of veterans or active duty military ladies. Now it's probably that. It's probably a good half,
right?
That come to us to our programs that are spouses, and then we have active duty or veterans. Now, what we're starting to see a little bit of as well is ladies that are both. We have they're a spouse and a veteran, or they're active duty still. So that is pretty, unique, and it's very interesting to try to serve, that whole spectrum of ladies. And what someone can really expect when they come to us is, I think maybe not what they think about when they first sign up to come to the women's program. And so that always makes it really interesting that when a woman signs up, she often has in her mind, this is why I want to go to a women's program. I need this for this specific purpose, or to help my spouse, or to be more effective in serving my community or other people like me. And so when they come to us, their expectations often are one, and they find out that it's something else.
Right.
But what they can expect from us is really a very open, honest teaching and relationships from ladies who have been in the same place where they are. Right. And I think that is really dynamic, and it creates an environment where women start to feel really comfortable and start to feel kind of connection with some ladies that maybe they haven't felt before. It's just really different than having a support group in your neighborhood. I know just from when we lived on base, there's neighbors, there's other wives whose husbands are deployed, and you kind of find there's connection with that. There's kind of someone else is going through the same thing that I am. Right. This is really unique because we create an environment where ladies are more maybe open to sharing struggles, maybe something that you wouldn't share with a neighbor, or a friend group that you have at the park, that you meet at the park on base or something. Yeah. And so that's kind of what can be expected when ladies come to us for a program.
So one of the important aspects of the Mighty Oaks programs, all of our programs, is that they're what we would describe as peer-to-peer programs. Mm-hmm. So it's not a clinician of some kind or a therapist speaking to their patients, or even a teacher speaking to their students. It's very much a peer-to-peer. Right. I am what you are. I've struggled the way that you've struggled and been through some of that. On our women's program, or in our women's program, it's exactly the same.
Yes.
Can you talk about your own experience as a military spouse, some of the struggles that that you recognized, or maybe you recognize in hindsight now, looking back over those things, and I guess in all of that, why you care about spouses, and then talk about some of the other instructors that we have who are part of our program, because again, one of the things that makes it work, as interesting as the dynamic is that we have instructors who can speak to each group of people that are there. So maybe start with your own experience, for those that don't know you or know us really well, and then talk about some of the other instructors that are part of the program.
Right. So some of you know us and kind of know a little bit about us and our background, but Jeremy was in the Marine Corps for 4 years, active duty, sometime before and after that, reserve, whatever.
Whatever. Whatever.
I would say probably the majority of the time that Jeremy was in the Marine Corps, he was gone, either deployed, worked up to a deployment, long exercises, that where you're gone for weeks at a time, days at a time. And so we did spend a lot of time apart during that time. And then when he got, there's the combat deployment, and then he got out of the Marine Corps after that shortly, and we went into full-time ministry.
Yeah.
Went on staff at our church, and then a few years after that moved to the San Francisco Bay Area for Jeremy to be a senior pastor at a church there. And it was while we were at that church that we were connected with Mighty Oaks. You attended a men's program, and then shortly after that we started talking about starting a women's program. And so I was asked to help be on the team that would help kind of develop the women's program. And we had been through quite a few things, in our life up to that point. And it was an interesting time for us because we had just, Jeremy had shortly before that attended a men's program, started kind of helping teach at the programs and all of that. And so I think being reconnected to military families again started to maybe kind of bring up some things maybe that we had been through, and allowed us to start healing in some of those areas, talking about some of those things. But at that point in my life, when I attended, I would say attended the women's program, because when I first kind of attended, it was kind of a mock program that
you were attending the ones that you guys were starting.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we kind of had a planning session where we were put through kind of a mock program where we were taught the classes by some of the guys. We were taught the classes. We were kind of brought through the same process that the men were brought through at the time at a program where we did like the life plans and we heard all the classes and those kinds of things. We shared testimonies with each other of the ladies that were part of that group at that time. And so it was kind of during that time that I say, I went through the program, that time that I realized there were some things in my life that I didn't have that I needed to have. One of those things was I did not really at that time have, I would say, close connections with women in my life that I could really talk to about some of the things that I was struggling with. At that time, you were a pastor at a church, and so I couldn't really talk to people if I was struggling, in my marriage or with that relationship. And so it was a really interesting time for me because with that, I realized I needed to really start having some of those relationships in my life with women and be more open about talking about struggles that I had had in my life and in our marriage and all of that. And so that was kind of the time for me where I started realizing I needed to kind of start processing through some of those things, being more open about talking about them, and I guess fighting for those things, in my life. And so from that, we started doing women's programs. We developed a curriculum and all of that, and we started, having a women's program. And so when I see ladies come to the program that maybe are struggling in general, because I believe that you don't have to have struggled in the same way to know what it feels like to have a difficult time in your life. I think it can be so healing to meet someone that has struggled, and they know what it's like to fight through that, have to come out of it, know what it looks like, on the other side and how to do that. And so when I meet ladies who are struggling and having a difficult time, and maybe it is finding connections with other women, maybe it is having those close relationships in your life with other women, it really is, to me, just sharing that part of myself, I guess, that maybe would help that one person to see, okay, well, I'm not the only one that feels that way.
Yeah.
And so for me, mostly, when I am teaching or speaking to the ladies that come to us in our women's program, it would mostly be speaking from the perspective of a spouse and a woman, really. And so, and because what we tell ladies at the beginning, it doesn't really, it matters, but what we're focusing on is how to be the woman that God created you to be, and what does your life look like now moving forward,
right.
Past some of those struggles, through some of those struggles, and coming out on the other side of that and living a life that would be victorious, and living a life that now you can move forward in a new way, in that way. And so, not that it doesn't matter what you have done in your life, but
Sure.
let's allow that to be a part of your life.
Yeah.
And kind of move forward from there. And so I think it can be really empowering for women to get a hold of that, and especially from the perspective of so many different testimonies, so many different stories, so many different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so as part of our women's team, we have ladies who, like me, are spouses. We have ladies that are a spouse and their husband is a first responder, maybe still active duty.
Yeah.
We have had a couple of ladies like that. We have ladies on our leadership team that are also veterans themselves. And so from that perspective, it gives us such a broad way to be able to minister to the ladies that are coming to us. And from kind of every, we have the veteran perspective, we have the spouse perspective, we have the first responder spouse perspective. We have so many ladies that are able to speak into different situations that it really allows us to have that true, like you said, peer-to-peer, testimonial-based kind of mentorship program, from the classes being taught to just kind of having that one-on-one time with the ladies.
Yeah, that's good. I think having the diversity of instructors and team leaders to help folks walk through that is really, really important. And part of that is you look at someone, if you're struggling, when you look at someone else, generally you see the very best of them, and you might come to the conclusion that they've never struggled with anything, they've never had a problem. And so that perspective that we don't all need to struggle the same way, it's just understanding that there is a way to move through struggle and get to the other side of that that's really important. So you don't have to look at someone and say, well, they haven't struggled exactly like me, so they can't help me. What you need to do is look at someone who is further along than you,
Right.
understand that they have struggled, but they've continued to move forward. And so maybe, even though our struggles aren't exactly the same, they can help me with that.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things about, our story, yours and mine, that has always been interesting is, I left the Marine Corps, started working at a church. And so, whether it's right or wrong, you feel like you're in a situation where if you struggle, you can't let people know that you're struggling.
Yeah.
Even on a church staff, which is where we were. And, specifically during that first year after I left the Marine Corps, we had a lot of struggles, and we had 2 little kids we were trying to take care of, and I was a mess processing out of the Marine Corps. But that's just something we just kind of sat on and dealt with. Got a little bit more stable, maybe functional, and then even started pastoring. And again, like you said, you're in that position where I'm hurting in some areas, but I can't ask for help. So you just kind of keep pushing it down and keep pushing it down and keep moving on. And until you finally deal with that, you're not able really to move forward. And you and I have had these conversations, and we look at our lives different. But I look back and I say, for about a year, we really had a hard time. And you would say probably for 10 years after I came back from the Marine Corps, we had a hard time.
Yep.
And
so.
we had to have a moment where, not a moment, but as a process of time where we started to work through some of those things.
Right.
And I think that's what's important for people to understand is everyone struggles. Everyone is struggling. What you're looking for is not someone who's struggled exactly the same way that you have, but someone that can help you move forward from that.
Yeah, and when you look at, it's always like that, when you look at people on the outside, they look like they have it all together. And that's part of kind of what our Imperfect show is a little bit about. It's just like you look at other people and you're like, oh wow, like their life is perfect, they've got it all together. And when we have met ladies that have come to the women's program, and even when I attended and I met some of the ladies that I was going to be on the team with to develop the women's program, I'm like, oh wow, like these, they've got it all together. And similar when we meet ladies that come to us, the ladies on our leadership team, the students, they have the walls up, just immediately they have walls up. They feel very, they're hurt and they're broken. And like, these ladies cannot relate to me. No one knows what it's like to be me. No one knows what it's like to struggle. And they look at us who maybe are, like you said, a few steps ahead, and like, oh wow, these, like they've got it all together. And then they start hearing, ladies share stories.
Then they get to know you guys and realize you don't have it all together.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we do in all of our programs, the men's program too, is we have a class and then we break out into a smaller group to discuss. And we go through some questions and we discuss the material that was just taught. But through that, a lot of on our women's program side, we call it the group facilitators, are able to, just kind of share a little bit about themselves and kind of some things they've been through. And even if they're not teaching a class or sharing a testimony in front of the whole group, they're able to do that within the ladies in their group. And just hearing from them, we start to realize, oh yeah, like they're not perfect. They don't have it all together. They do know what it's like to go through hard things. But they are a few steps ahead, and they've kind of come out on the other side, or kind of starting to come out on the other side. And so they know what that looks like.
You said that the program really works towards understanding who God created you to be and living according to that. I'd like for you to explain that a little bit and why that's important and what that even means. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that we're a faith-based program, but that doesn't mean that everyone who attends the program has a faith background.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people who attend the program would say they either don't believe in God, they haven't really thought about it. You have the atheist that says, I don't believe in God, the agnostic that says, I don't know anything about God. People who would say, I once considered myself a Christian, but I've been hurt by God. So everything on the spectrum. And I think that's important to acknowledge as well, that you don't have to be a Christian or go to church or have Christian friends to attend the program. That's not what learn to align your life to the life God has created you to live means.
Yeah.
But that is the way forward. And so can you talk about why that's important and what that means to be the person that, the woman that God created you to be? What does that mean, and why is that important in the context of marriages that are hurting and post-traumatic stress disorder and sexual violence? I mean, these are all things you deal with. Why is that what you come back to as the solution?
It's important because we all kind of have, whether we acknowledge it or realize it or not, have kind of a standard that we use to evaluate ourselves in our life. And it's important to have something that you can align your life to that doesn't ever change. And so when we look at the principles that we look at in the Bible and what we believe to be the principles that we should align ourselves to be the person that God created us to be, those are things that never change. They have not changed over time. Right. They will never change. And so aligning our life to something that is fixed is just so important. And what we say, to ladies is maybe you don't believe in God. Maybe you don't have a relationship with God. Maybe you've never heard any of this stuff ever before. But why not just look at this in a different way? Maybe you have always believed this one way. Maybe you don't believe in anything. Maybe you just live life day by day, figuring it out as you go along. But why not just look at life? Why not just look at yourself as a person in a little bit of a different way that you've never thought of before, or that you've never looked at before? Maybe you've never thought of these things before. And we basically just take, our program is based on really just principles, characteristics that we find in Scripture to kind of apply to our lives to be the person that God created us to be. And so really, that's all it is. It's really very simple, but it's important because we just need to align our lives to something that is fixed and that never changes.
But as we really do our best to serve the veterans community, we've gotten to know some amazing people. One of the people that is amazing is with us today. He is no stranger to the Mighty Oaks Show or to the Mighty Oaks YouTube channel. In fact, if you look up Luis Rivera, you'll find his video. I believe it's still the most watched and listened to video on our YouTube channel, which is crazy to me because I didn't think it was that good. But Luis, apparently other people think it's good. But no, it's awesome. Luis actually works with us here at Mighty Oaks. He is the operations manager for our programs team. Again, if you're not familiar with what we do a number of things with veterans, but kind of the core of what we do, the main effort of Mighty Oaks is what we call our legacy programs. And we have these programs at one of 4 locations across the country. It's a week-long program where men in our men's program, ladies in our women's program come. And really we talk about trauma, we talk about what it is and how it impacts not only us, but our relationships and our worldview and our purpose going forward. But beyond that, we like to offer a solid framework to move forward in spite of what's happened to us. And so we do that. But that is our main effort generally, and this year has been different, but generally we have close to 800 folks that will go through one of those week-long programs, again, across the country. And Luis is very, very integral in managing that. And so thankful for his perspective. Before Mighty Oaks, though, he served in the United States Navy, and for a large part of that served as a Navy SEAL. And that's what I want to talk about today. So many interesting stories that we have. And Luis, you and I have talked several times, even on the Mighty Oaks Show. But I wanted to talk specifically today about your experience coming into the SEAL community. So for those that don't know you, talk about how you came into the Navy, first of all. Your story is really interesting because you didn't have a direct pipeline into to BUDS and to SEALs. In fact, you served for quite a while in the Navy before you made that leap. So talk about how you got into the Navy and then how you ended up going to BUDS in the first place. And then let's talk a little bit about that training, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would start off by saying that my siblings and I were born in Puerto Rico. My mom and dad were born in Puerto Rico, and when I was 6, they moved to Louisiana. At right around 12 years old, my parents got a divorce, and then at 17, I graduated high school and I entered the Navy. I originally entered as a submarine readyman, that contract, a submarine readyman. I went to, that was in 1990. And I went to Groton, Connecticut for my first, schooling, about a year and a half. Got to my first submarine in 92 in Norfolk, Virginia. And I remember being an E4 in Norfolk, Virginia. Back as a readyman, we used to use those 3.5-inch discs. Yeah. We would have to leave the submarine with our little pouches and walk up the ladder and go up to the submarine tender, get our message traffic. Well, one morning it was just about, the sun's about to come up. It was still dark. And I could remember seeing out of the corner of my eye coming down this ladder, this bread truck just pull up it was by itself, this bread truck. And all of a sudden these bunch of guys got out, big guys with some weird uniforms, just started walking down this pier. And they got into this white van with every single window, including the windshield, was blacked out. And they left. And so I went downstairs to the sub after delivering the traffic, and I asked my chief what was going on there. And he told me who they were. And they were SEALs. So that piqued my interest as to, who they were, what I wanted to do. Right. Then in 1995, that submarine got decommed in Mare Island, and I submitted a package to go to BUD/S. And things didn't work out for me. I was there for 2 weeks. So in 95, I was 23, I think, 24. Yeah, 24. And wow. And so things didn't work out. I quit. I quit even before Hell Week. So I went back to another submarine for 4.5 years. During that time frame, 95, I just got married. I started to have children. And in 1999 or so, that marriage just dissolved. And my kids were young. I made the conscious decision to go back to BUD/S. And they were really young. And in 2000, I went back to BUD/S in July.
How much time had passed between the first time and the second time?
Roughly 4.5 years, almost 5 years.
So you were 27, 28?
I was about to turn 28. That's an interesting story because I got to BUD/S in July of 2000. I was 27 and started BUD/S. I got injured in my first Hell Week. It was a summer Hell Week. And because of the point in the Hell Week where I got injured, I had to go back to day one, week one of training.
Most people don't like to do BUD/S once. You did it 3 times.
Well, I wouldn't say I did it 3 times. I think I tried out 3 times,
right.
Which meant it's something significantly different for someone who has gone through BUD/S. I tried out 3 times. The 3rd time it stuck. So, but I did start off the 3rd time from day one, week 1. I will say that. And what that really meant for me was instead of a summer Hell Week, I went into a winter Hell Week. And that's a very different story for guys that are going through BUD/S, especially for me who was born in Puerto Rico, raised in Louisiana, used to hot weather, and so out of the frying pan into the fire, right? And so back to what I was saying about my age in Hell Week, the second time in 2000, which was in December, I turned 28 on the second day of Hell Week. And man, our numbers were dwindling, and we were left with less than 20 guys we started off, I think, in orientation right around 130 something. Wow.
What's the average age of a guy going through BUD/S?
Yeah, I would say the average age, I don't know if it's changed much, but in the lower 20s, like 21, 22, maybe 23, somewhere around there.
So you were in the Navy, you decided to lateral over. Someone coming into the Navy, is it possible to come in with a contract that sends you directly to BUD/S out of basic or whatever?
That's correct. In 2006, it was when the Navy decided to give the SEAL their own rate.
Yeah.
So originally I was a submarine rating, and that was a source rating in order to even attempt to go. So now you can go in with a contract as a special operator, as an SO.
Do you think it helped you to have that Navy experience, or did it hurt you going into it? Sometimes ignorance is bliss sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think initially when things were going this way as far as the rating is concerned, you saw a lot of, I think, immaturity going in because guys were just doing it for the glamour. Guys were just doing it for the money. And I think there's been a switch that's happened. I'm not too sure. I got out in 2015. So I think because of my Navy being in the military for 10 years and also the fact that I was committed and I was 28, I think it helped me to have that maturity level and that vision that's just a little bit wider. going in.
Were you treated better or worse because of your?
Yeah, that's. I will say there were a few experiences when, every single phase I went into, there's 3 phases in buds. So every single phase I went into it, man, I had to, go back to that humble pie. Not that everyone doesn't eat humble pie, but I
Right.
think because I was more senior and they expected more from me, there was some humble pie that I had to eat. Even going into my platoon, I was in E6 going into a platoon that had seasoned E5s and who were there much longer than I. So it really trained me to go into platoon and keep my head down and volunteer for everything.
Yeah, that's crazy. So a lot of people are very interested, and I think part of it is just popular media, it's movies, it's other things, very interested in SEALs specifically. And if you ask most people, what do you know about the SEALs, they'd say, whatever. They might name some operation or something, but most people would talk about buds because I think that's what most people are familiar with. And yet most people don't know anything about buds. It's crazy because, we were just talking about this, but the Discovery Channel put out a series on buds that you were a part of. And interestingly, as a side note, one of the ways people find your video on the Mighty Oaks YouTube channel is through that video, which is pretty crazy. I've had people, when I've been out speaking, that will come up to me and say, hey, do you know Luis Rivera? I remember watching this video, and that's how they know you, which is pretty cool. But describe first of all what buds is. So there's 3 phases to it. What's the objective? And what do those 3 phases look like? And then, I'd love to talk about, some of your personal challenges getting through that. I believe that most people, this is my opinion, but I believe that most people going into the military, physically, they could probably deal with whatever training. I mean, we talk about these different types of training. Most people can deal with it, not all people, but most people going into the military could. And so I don't think that's the thing that causes, most people to drop. But describe buds. What are the objectives? What are they trying to accomplish? What are those 3 phases? And then let's talk about some of the challenges of that.
Yeah, I think to begin with, I think the best thing to say as far as buds is concerned is this crawl, walk, run way of doing things. You start at the really basic level. So it stands for Basic Enlisted. I'm sorry, that's for some reason. Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL. That's what it stands for, BUDS. And so the first phase it's considered a phase that's meant to weed out those who aren't really committed. And each phase is roughly 7 weeks long. It's just really meant there's Hell Week is the point when a lot of attrition happens.
At what point is that in the training? Hell Week.
So in 1995, I think when I went through in 95, it was like in the 3rd week. And then when I went in 2000, if I'm not mistaken, it was in the 5th week. And so it shifts. It shifts. But it's basically meant to test someone to see how committed they are. And a lot of people that go there, believe that the instructor staff is there to make sure you don't make it. Well, that's not the case at all. They don't really have to try hard to get someone to quit. They just allow the program to work. And they're really there to really get guys moving forward and go to the next phase. They really want to build guys up, but guys somehow get this internal focus and not this team focus, and they just end up deselecting themselves or drop on request.
So that's the first phase. What are the other phases designed to accomplish?
The other phases are meant to just establish a foundation so you can build upon when you get to SEAL qualification training, which is right after BUDS. And so the second phase is dive phase. It's all water stuff. It starts with open circuit and then it finishes off with closed circuit scuba. And it's just really meant to test your competency in the water. I had problems in second phase during the open circuit tests, and there was a point there where I was worried that whether or not I was going to be able to make it. But it really tests your competency under stress, underwater.
Yeah, and then third phase is just continued preparation to
Right. So third phase is more of a land warfare phase. They test different skills that they teach you, with its weapons or land nav or land warfare. And so there's just these tests that you get taught. You
Yeah.
get taught these classes, and then you have to perform. And yeah, so it's really more of a test as a team effort before you go into the next phase, which is other SEAL qualification training.
What is the? I think a lot of people misunderstand the mission of the SEAL teams, and it's very different than a lot of folks who are in the Navy. To me, even me, having been around it for a long time, it's a real weird thing. Like, you have the Navy, and then you have the SEAL community. But when you talk about buds and the attrition of buds and how important that is, and it is important to weed out those who are not committed, why is that? What is the mission of the SEAL team that requires that kind of dedication or focus?
Yeah, I think when I went through, what I learned was it allows you to see whether or not you're there for the right reasons. Now, that doesn't mean there's some people that just fall through the cracks. Every force, no matter who you are, you're going to have some problem children. But I think for the most part, it really allows you to find out for yourself if you're there for the right reasons. And they do a good job to ensuring that you can prove to yourself that you're there for the right reasons.
Yeah. And then when a SEAL team is deployed later on, after all your training, you're in a team. What are those teams typically doing, other than killing bin Laden, which is the only thing any of us know about, and making movies? Other than those two things, what is the bigger mission of the SEAL team?
Yeah, it's a maritime force. It's morphed right after 9/11. Things just changed a lot for the community, and we saw that with Iraq and Afghanistan. But I think originally it was meant for just a maritime mission. The force grew during that time, during 9/11. Two new teams stood up right after 9/11, Team 7 and Team 10. And I think some missions changed, the way things happened changed. But the force itself, as a platoon or as a troop with two platoons, I don't think that, their ability to fit in different situations, I think that's what makes them so good. And I don't think that's really changed at all.
How many times did you deploy as a SEAL to combat?
4 times.
4 times. Okay. And eventually you went back and worked at BUDS. You were one of the instructors at BUDS, correct? And that was after your combat deployments?
So yes, my last deployment was in 2010, and that was to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And right after that deployment, I ended up going to SEAL qualification training, the land warfare portion. And SEAL qualification training is another round of just working with tactics. And you've got dive phase, you've got land warfare phase, you got other phase. And I was in a land warfare phase. At that point, it was the very end of SEAL qualification training. So I was there for a couple of years. And then I made the decision to retire, and I submitted my retirement paperwork. Yeah. And just before I retired, for a couple of years, I ended up going back to the beginning of BUDS, which is orientation. So guys come from boot camp, they go into an 8-week training program in Great Lakes, and then they come to orientation to orient them before BUDS.
So how important was it to you as a SEAL who had deployed to combat, when you went back to BUDS as an instructor, how important was it to you to make sure that the right people got through and the wrong people didn't? Did that change your perspective on that process, coming back as someone who's been deployed, forward deployed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's difficult to try to apply, deployments, because deployments change from time to time, and what you've learned there, and trying to determine what basic core values are used in deployments and instill that in training.
Yeah.
Because deployments are different, but certain things don't change, whether it's integrity, whether it's your ability to perform under stress, and take the focus off yourself, because those kinds of things you can see early on in training, they just naturally rise. Those guys who just are self-focused, who just do things, whether it's character-wise, those are the kind of things that need to be weeded out in that portion of the training.
Yeah. I remember, and I don't like to drop this in every conversation, but I remember when I was at officer candidate school as a Marine candidate, right? I was getting ready, I was going through the process. I was called a candidate before being commissioned. I remember one of the days there, one of our instructors, and for those that are unfamiliar, it doesn't matter that much, I guess, but at officer candidate school, there are drill instructors who come off the drill field to run the candidates through their training at officer candidate school. So we have drill instructors there. But they're all senior staff NCOs. So, they're staff sergeants, they're gunnies, and then, typically a first sergeant. And I remember one day, one of those staff NCOs, in the context of training, saying, look, you have to understand this. We do what we do to make sure you're ready to go into the fleet, to lead Marines, because someday we may be the platoon sergeant of the platoon you're leading. We may be fighting side by side with you, and we want to make sure you're ready. And that's always stuck with me, that at every phase of training, and all of the folks who are involved in training in the military, there's a vested interest in that training, because at some point you may move out of the training world and into a combat world, and now those who are doing the training and those who are being trained are fighting side by side. And I think it's intriguing to come back from a combat deployment and now you're responsible for training. Because you know what's at stake with those who are downrange making those decisions. And in a peacetime world, you just don't care as much. And there's not an easier way to say it. But in combat, the person standing next to you, you want to know that they're capable of doing whatever needs to be done to win. This has been an interesting season, of course, for everyone, and for us here at the Mighty Oaks Foundation has certainly been an interesting time. We've got programs going on all of the time now, which is great. We talked about this maybe an episode or two ago with Brandon Kunith, our National Programs Director, how we've adjusted some things and how we've worked through some of those things, but it's all still happening, and it's great. But a lot of other things are happening in the world too, and I wanted to spend some time today with our guest. He has become a friend of mine over the last several years, a couple of years, has a military background, served as a missionary with his parents before that, now pastoring a church, and all of that has, for the last couple of years, worked with Mighty Oaks and done so much of our mentoring and counseling. And so it's great to have a conversation with him. Again, the world is so weird that we need to get a broader perspective, and I know our guest will do that. So Matt Statler is our guest today. Matt, thanks for taking the time to join us today. I've wanted to have a conversation for a long time. It's just the timing's never worked out, but it did today, and I'm glad it did. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I really appreciate you guys, and I enjoy watching the Mighty Oaks show and all that you guys do.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. And you're a big part of that. We've gone through a growth phase over the last couple of years with programs and all of that. And a big part of that for us was adding a mentor team. And you helped to lead that and really help form that. So, yeah, it's awesome to see good things happening. Matt, your story is fascinating, and we could jump in anywhere. You've got so many good things to say. Start at the beginning. I have heard about your childhood a little bit, but not a lot. Can you talk about your parents, your family, the missions work there, and then transition to coming back to the United States and eventually ending up in the United States Army?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was born in 1985. So that was an interesting time in and of itself. But my parents were missionaries. My dad was a missionary in Italy for 10 years, and he met my mom in France. And actually, they both came from Arizona. They were both Arizona natives, and they had to meet in Europe to meet each other.
Sometimes that's the case.
It is. And so they met, and then shortly after, I came along, and I was born in Tucson, but probably within about 8 months, I was growing up in Africa. Senegal, West Africa. So if you look at Africa and it looks like an ice cream cone about to fall into the ocean, the very tip, that's where Senegal is. It's primarily French speaking with, of course, the national tribal languages. and we lived out in a smaller town, and almost you would call it a village. And man, it was, it was interesting. I was homeschooled during that time. My parents served really a lot in this town, that there just wasn't any growth. The church was established and it only had a few people, but near the end of their time, it started to grow, and now it's run by local nationals. Awesome. Who are taking the gospel to their families. And so yeah, my dad went back to school and got his doctorate to help serve a theological institute that they had started there. And he died actually shortly thereafter, after getting his doctorate, and died of cancer. And, wow. and we think it's because of the way the peanuts are processed and the aflatoxins. And so they didn't catch the cancer fast enough, and he passed away. And consequently, he passed away while I was deployed in 2004.
Wow.
So, but yeah, I grew up there. We moved into the big city of Dakar, which is the capital city of Senegal. And I went to a Christian high school, and, did my time there. And, I came to faith when I was probably about 5. I remember it real clearly. I was eating a Ninja Turtle ice cream from an ice cream shop, and I was sitting in the back of the car, and I just realized how sinful I was, but how great the world was, and how God had blessed me with all this. And so I surrendered my life to Christ then, and I believe he kept me out of a lot of the trouble that I could have gotten into.
Sure.
Should that not have been the case. And I was baptized probably around 8 years old.
Wow.
And man, so that's the Senegal story, and there's more to that, right? Growing up in a village where witchcraft and witch doctors were kind of the norm. It's like 96% Muslim, but 100% animist. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. How old were you when you moved away from there and moved back to the United States?
So I graduated from high school in Senegal.
You did.
And then came back to the States.
Okay, so you came back to the States and then went into the Army. Was there a period of time between when you moved back and when you enlisted in the Army?
Yes, there was. So I came back to say I'd always wanted to be in the military ever since I was young. Man, I just felt called to the military. I felt called to the Army. My grandfather was in World War II. Yeah. He was a Silver Star recipient, and just a really brave man. And so I really wanted to emulate that. I wanted to be like him. And so came back to the States. I did a semester at the University of Arizona. I did a stint with the ROTC there, and that's where I decided that I was never going to be enlisted, because I realized how hard the enlisted job would be. And then the war was going pretty hard. It was 2003 when I was going to college. I said, I'm going to miss this war if I don't enlist right away.
Boy, were you wrong.
Yeah. So I was wrong. I did not know it was going to take 20 years. But so I joined, did my training, and then was assigned to 10th Mountain 2nd Brigade over at Fort Drum, and then deployed pretty quick to Iraq right after that. And that was back in the early 2004 to 2005 range.
What were some of the things that I've known other missionaries' kids have grown up on the mission field who have come to the United States and ended up in the military, and then just through college and other acquaintances, I've known folks who have made that transition. That's not an easy transition by itself, growing up in a different culture. You come and you're trying to adjust to the United States and to the culture here, and then you go into a completely different culture, which is the military culture. Can you talk through some of that? I would imagine that was not as easy as just I went from one to the other and ended up in the Army.
Yeah, a lot of third culture kids is kind of what the nomenclature that we've been given. Third culture, right? Because we have our initial family culture, what for me, the United States. We have our second culture, which is growing up in Africa and Senegal. And then we're kind of like a third culture ourselves. So third culture kids are typically chameleons. We learn quickly how to interact and to become like the culture that we're immersed in. So for me, it was kind of simple, joining in and just being part of the military culture. I still had really high moral standards on my first deployment. But when my dad passed, that's when I started pursuing alcohol and women, and basically anything that I could to deaden the pain of the loss. So yeah, just the transition as a third culture kid wasn't really that difficult. You kind of feel like you don't belong anywhere, right? Because all these different cultures. But the military takes all these different cultures and grinds us up together. And so it's kind of a new culture that you assume as you enter in. So for me, it was great because I'm with all these other folks who are in a new culture as well. So it was pretty easy transition.
What was your faith, and I'd like to talk about when your dad passed away, but what was your faith like when you went into the military? Do you feel like, it was strong, you were doing what you would now counsel other people to do? Or was it something that happened at some point in time, it was part of who you are? Where would you say you were with God at that time?
I would say my faith was weak, was a weak faith. I mean, I read my Bible, I memorized the verses. It was mandatory for school for me to do all that stuff. And I believed in God. I believed that Christ came and he was the free gift. But honestly, there was a streak of rebellion that God had not removed from my heart. And so I was very much seeking after satisfaction through my own means. I'd always wanted to be in the military. So that was one step in pursuing what I thought I wanted to do. So there was definitely a streak of selfishness, rebellion, that God had not burnt out of me through adversity.
Yeah, I was raised in a pastor's home as well. Watched my dad start a church and lived through that. And, I kind of joke that that's part of the reason I went into the Marine Corps was so I didn't end up there, right? But I was always proud of my dad and thankful for him and thankful for the work that my parents did. But there had to be, and there was a time in my 20s where I really had to make that my own. And having accepted Christ as a young person, that did not translate into a sanctified life for the process of growing into what God would have me to do. What was it about your dad's death that caused you to rebel? And maybe you're rebelling in your heart before that, but to just cast it off and pursue that.
Yeah. So, obviously life is complicated. There's so many factors as to why we do anything that we do.
Right.
But part of it was he was kind of like the last hook holding me from doing whatever I want, because you don't want to embarrass or hurt your parents or your dad. And so losing him, I was under a great amount of stress. I was deployed at the time. This is when Fallujah was, the second attack on Fallujah was happening. We were involved with that and supporting that. And so that stress, the loss of friends, and then just anger over the loss of my parent, my dad, and then the loss of friends, and then just being in that environment really led me to lash out. And so part of lashing out was trying to break every standard that I had grown up with.
Yeah. We'll continue through your story, but on this side of your story, you've had a lot of opportunity to counsel men and women who have served in the military. I don't know how many Mighty Oaks sessions you've done. It's a whole bunch, though. So You've probably talked to hundreds of veterans just through the programs that we do. A big part of, I think, surviving the loss of a loved one and combat and any other traumas in life is being prepared ahead of time. What would you tell your younger self to do to prepare for something like that before it happens? And I think that's where a lot of people live, right now.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to resiliency, it's really hard to prepare for something without actually going through
Sure.
adversity. I mean, we know that this is one of the ways that God refines us, through affliction.
Yeah.
Right. And so knowing in advance why God is allowing me to go through these traumatic scenarios, traumatic events, will prepare me. Really, it's perspective, honestly. I guess would be an easier way to explain it, that when you sin, or when someone sins against you, or when you experience loss, or when you go through a hard trial, there's two responses that we can respond with. We can respond with belief or unbelief. And my response was that of an unbeliever, right? I lashed out in anger, and I started experiencing greater anxieties, mainly because I wasn't trusting that God had a purpose through this plan.
Right.
So knowing in advance helps. It's kind of like when you're doing the most deadly, most likely courses of action, in a combat scenario, you're ready with a battle drill. And so some of the things I work with people who are fairly new to the military are some battle drills. And actually this works great for marriage. So we walk through that time when you said something stupid and your wife gets mad at you, right? We walk through.
So every day you're talking about.
Every day, yes. Every day we have to respond. Yeah, so absolutely. So, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond when a member of your platoon dies, right? How are you going to grieve in a God-honoring way versus a non-God-honoring way? How are you, what if your child gets sick, with a certain disease? How are you going to respond? So having some battle drills, some plans ahead of time, and that's what we see in scripture. We see the psalmist crying out in his suffering and reflecting on what he is going to do when he's betrayed again.
Yeah.
That's why I love the Psalms, is because it's like a little bit of a hook, right? You talk about God, you talk about how bad things are going, you talk about where you are right now, how people have hurt you. And then on the tail end, it's always kind of a turning back to God and say, even though my friends and my family betray me, I will trust in you. And so knowing that you have a plan going into these scenarios, really for me, is one of the ways I try to prepare people for continued loss, continued adversity.
You experienced a moment like that or a period like that in your own life, and you came to the other side of that. As a parent with small kids, you have small kids, have a new child in your house.
Yep.
How do you approach what you just said with children so that you can raise them in a way where, we all make our own decisions, but they will hit a moment like that, because they will inevitably, but that they'll process that the right way? How do you approach that with your kids?
So there is I don't know if he's a poet, a theologian, but Philip Bennett Power, and he said something about letting our trust be raised and nurtured in the nursery of the small adversities, something like that. I'm paraphrasing. So I've really taken that to heart with my kids, and I look for talking points in order for them to grow in their situation. So my oldest, he's a kind of like a thinker, but he's kind of a spaz thinker. And so he gets bullied because he's not paying attention. And so kids don't want to play with him. So for me, I'm not going to try to fix the scenario and make him have good friends, but I am going to teach him, how do you respond when people don't like you? Because regardless of the situation you get into, as you grow older, someone's not going to like you. How do you take criticism? So I do that with my other one. He's more of an adventurer. You know, he's always climbing, building, jumping, you know, doing something crazy. I have to work with him about appropriate risk versus excessive risk. You know, and this goes back to just basic parenting.
Yeah.
I've been hearing a lot that there's no manual for parenting in a pandemic. And I just laugh because I'm like, when do you think the book of Deuteronomy was written? Right? I mean, this is post Exodus. This is in the desert as they're suffering.
Right.
I mean, like that's a parenting manual written for adversity.
Yeah.
And in it, you know, this is Deuteronomy 6, where it talks about teach these things to your children as you're walking along the way.
Right.
And so some folks have broken it down to faith talks and faith walks. So I try to do both. I try to have intentional time where we talk about our feelings, our emotions, life difficulties.
Yeah.
And then I try to do it as I'm driving, and you know, and in this heightened racist, anti-racist world that we live in, it's really easy to drive down the road, and if you see someone and you say, you know, isn't it interesting that God made us, you know, all different, and how he made us, it's beautiful. And that's a faith talk, because it's just an opportunity, or a faith walk. As you're walking about your way, you're able to share aspects about God as you are going. Yeah. Whereas faith talks are more intentional, what we would call family worship.
Right. For those of you that are watching, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you are listening, for those of you over at Mojo, jump over to YouTube, look for the Mighty Oaks Foundation or the Mighty Oaks Show, and we'd love to have you subscribe there, leave comments, let us know what you're thinking, share this content out, and would love to connect with you in any way that we can. Thank you again, and we will talk to you next time.